Hi. One of the main complaints a lot of people have about education these days is it doesn't provide students with practical tools that they can go out and use in their everyday life. And it doesn't prepare them for the day-to-day things, the routines, and the types of responsibilities that adults have to deal with after they exit high school especially. College, of course, gives us specialized skills that we use in the workplace mostly. But there's very little direct explicit education on simple things like criminal law procedure, or in particular even what is criminal and what's not, what is legal and what's not. That's not ever explicitly taught. And then personal finance is probably the biggest complaint, that there aren't enough schools teaching simple things, how to balance a checkbook, how to deal with interest, how to invest money, and just simple responsibilities that adults have to deal with. And it is possible that that lack of direct explicit education has led to a wave, all these different waves of foreclosures, bankruptcies, and moreover just out of control debt, that people become burdened by credit card debt in particular. They overdraw their checking or savings account frequently and then incur fees, and they go underwater or just have negative experiences with finance such that their credit scores suffer, which then has knock-on effects later and in different areas of their life. So in a set of videos, I'm going to have a quick explanation of basic areas of personal finance here. Starting with the most commonsensical advice anybody should have an understanding of is just don't spend more than you earn, right? That's around the world the standard. People use cash, they don't spend more than they earn in the majority of the world's places. People don't have the luxury of taking out debt in order to finance assets. And the economies aren't structured around the world on financing growth through debt, similarly as the United States and Europe. The wealthier countries use debt more as a tool to finance growth, but around the world, people in the middle and lower classes just know that if you don't have the income, then you can't afford the things. So you want to control your revenues to expenditures, revenues being income and expenditures being expenses or spending. That's very, very simple. If you have $1,000, then you shouldn't spend more than $1,000. You should spend less than that, if at all possible. Now, of course, in many cases, it's just not possible, certainly in the short term, to live without some debt or some credit card debt, some kind of loan activity. Now, over the long term, that doesn't play out the same. You still need to have more coming in than you have going out, otherwise your debt just grows and grows, especially with interest. Right? So whatever your income is, you need to tailor your expenses, and that's just part of being a responsible adult and dealing with finance in the world where, sure, the money's printed or now just generated using binary code on a computer, and it's worth what people think it's worth. It's not unlimited supply. There are all these fundamental problems with the way money works, but in the real world still we have to deal with rules and regulations and pragmatic application of finance, which means that whether we think it's meritorious that rich people have access to all of these different things regardless of how much they actually work or inherited or how much they're exploiting people, and that's of course not fair to those who are poor or who are making less money. We still have to deal with it. So whether we like the system or not isn't really the important thing when it comes to being financially healthy and sound. So spending less than you make is an important part. You want to keep records. Again, just a simple checkbook. You know, you're going to have your pluses and your minuses. Well, of course, we're not writing checks anymore, so we shouldn't even talk about balancing a checkbook. But when you spend on your card, right, if you spend some money here, then you have to understand that the money on the other side either increases or decreases. Right? So if you're looking at spending on a credit card, if you put money on your credit card, if you put $500 on a credit card, then it has to come out of some other account to pay that credit card, right? So you should make an adjustment in a savings account, or at least keep these things in mind. If you're not writing it down, then you need to have an active memory such that if you have only a debit card, which is probably the best starter for younger people in particular, that they wouldn't have all of these credit cards that would then get out of control due to fees and interest and things. If they have $500 in an account, then every time they spend something, they need to keep track of that. And the phone nowadays, the phone is a perfect tool. It'll actually do it for you. And so you don't have to sit there at a desk and write these things in a checkbook or whatever. But then you should pay attention to, well, the phone doesn't update, the app doesn't update all of your purchases immediately from your balance. You need to keep ahead of when those purchases clear, to the extent that you're not going to overextend yourself and overdraw your account. Now banks are happy to let you overdraw your account, which is unfair, and perhaps there should be a law requiring that banks at least allow the option when you open an account that you would have no overdraft. You'd have overdraft protection, which means that you're not allowed to overdraft. Now they think it's a courtesy, they're doing you a favor, but they're going to then tax you, and they're going to charge you $25 or more for something like that for overdraft, right? So it's kind of a trick, and it's a way to make money for the banks, right? They make money off of fees largely. Most people's savings and checking accounts are relatively small, so banks are involved in other investing activity, but what they make off of the individual accounts in millions of individual account numbers is from those fees. Sometimes a monthly or annual fee, but most often just the overdraft fees or the late payment fees or something like that. So the phone is now a perfect daily or weekly planner that we can use to keep our financial health and keep our financial status at a stable and responsible level, right? So not spending more than you make is first and foremost, and then that doesn't mean that you're not eligible for a credit card. Students with zero incomes are eligible for credit cards. Where does the money come from? They take out a credit card, they spend money on it, and the credit card company is happy to give that to the students even though there's no demonstrated income, and the credit card companies then are somewhat predatory, knowing that they shouldn't give cards to people who don't have income or people who are already making late payments on bills and things, but they have incentive and there's low regulation in that area. So we want to be responsible and prudent with our finances if we want to keep the credit score going up and keep in good health and not become delinquent and not accrue account fees and things like that. The next thing in this video is we want to talk about paying off debt, especially credit card and loan debt that comes with interest, right? Now, if you borrow money from a friend or a parent, maybe they won't charge you interest, but again, that's a personal situation where you got lucky. Banks are in the habit or in the business of making money, and they don't loan money because they're your friends or because they're trying to do you a favor. Whether it's a credit card company or a financing company for an auto or home loan, they are only in business because they can make a profit. And a lot of those credit card accounts and mortgages and auto payment, auto loans and things aren't going to come back. Banks have bad loans. And so that's one of the ways that they justify higher interest rates, is because of the risk that they take by giving out loans. And it leads to predatory lending, of course, as we've seen in recent years. But that being a fact of life, now we need to, as consumers and as individuals, take a more intelligent approach to our personal finances. Again, that we aren't taking out more in loans than we can actually afford, right? Let's take, for example, if we have $1,000, our January starting balance on a credit card is $1,000. And we have 18% interest on that $1,000. 18% is assessed annually. So we want to divide that by 12, and we find that we've got 1.5% interest per month then. And so if we've got $1,000, that means that if we don't pay anything, which is not an option, we'd have $15 per month added to our $1,000 balance. Typically, the credit card company will do something like The minimum payment is the interest charge plus 1% of the balance, or roughly thereabouts. Often you see denominations of $5, so we'll say that the minimum payment is $25 on a balance of $1,000 at 18% per annum, or 1.5% per month. And so we pay $25, that means we pay $10 in our principal, because we have $15, 1.5% of 1,000 is $15. And so we pay $10 on the principal, that's 25 minus 15, we pay $15 on our interest. And so what did we really pay off from that 1,000? We paid off $10. We paid off $10, leaving us with a February starting balance of $990. Now, if we continue to pay only that minimum interest charge and we didn't use the credit card for anything, now that interest paid would be slightly lower. 990 times 1.5 is $14.85. So $14.85, well, what would we do? Now we're paying $10.15. 15 whole cents more on principal than we paid in the previous month. And so then our balance goes from $990 minus $10.15. We get $979.85. Right, so now our starting balance in March is $979.85. And if we continue to pay only the minimum balance, $979.85 times 0.015, we're paying $14.70. Now, so it's decreasing on the order of roughly 15 cents per month. The interest is decreasing. And then we'll pay $10.30 in principal, which means our balance then is going to reduce to $969.55. And so in 3 months now, we paid $75, but we've only reduced our balance by a little over $30. That's not a very good deal for us. And say if we miss a minimum payment, then the fee is going to be probably more than that minimum payment. If we pay late, then there's going to be another fee. These credit card debt situations can easily get out of control, such that people find themselves unable to pay, they just go into default. And that is a mistake, or as a consequence, people they have to spend many, many years outside of the financial system. 7 years, 6, 7 years before the debt is automatically off the credit report. And when it comes to student loan debt, that's never off the credit report. It can't be discharged in bankruptcy. And so defaulting and going delinquent on loans has negative repercussions, whereas around the world, again, these loans and debt structures are not as common, and the penalties are not as stiff. People don't have to they don't have to submit themselves to credit checks to get housing or employment or other things. They don't need a credit card to make simple purchases, to do simple things, right? If you go delinquent on your debt, or if you overdraw your bank account, you might find yourself completely removed from the financial system, such that simple aspects of life are nearly impossible. And a lot of people in the United States, and not as much, but also in Europe, are facing this type of situation where perhaps a predatory lender loaned them too much money on a credit card. They were a little irresponsible. They spent more than they made, not thinking about things because maybe they didn't get any explicit education from adults and from the schools when they were younger. Didn't really understand how to manage money. Didn't really understand the long-term consequences of dealing with money and living in this highly financialized system. Within a matter of months or years, especially in their earlier years when income is unstable, they could find themselves delinquent and in default on credit card debt, and also having our overdrawn checking or savings account then banned basically from opening a checking or savings account, banned from opening a credit card, having very low credit, then not able to get different jobs, different housing opportunities, and not able to participate in the financial system, such that they wouldn't even have a bank account for in this recent round of stimulus from the IRS that they would be able to get deposited in their account. All sorts of negative consequences, which people around the world don't have to deal with. Now, in the Islamic finance system, companies and banks aren't as, they don't have the option to give loans to people who don't have stable income, or they can't give out, there are different rules about how much money they can loan people. They can't just do this predatory lending. Now, there are certain disadvantages to that also, where there's just not as much incentive for banks to sponsor different activities, and certain people can't get loans when they may in fact have the ability, the means to repay them. So there are some trade-offs there, but main takeaway is that the American financial system is very serious and it's aggressive, and by knowing that, being conscious of the impersonal nature of it, that if somebody goes into default, doesn't matter if their source of income, doesn't matter if they become disabled, or they got into an accident, or they lost their job, no fault of their own. These monthly payments keep on coming, and there's very, very little the law is willing to do to step in between the lender and the borrower to get the creditors off of that person from calling, from harassing them, from sending threatening letters, from going directly into the bank account and taking the money. And eventually, again, millions of people will end up in default and in a situation where they're effectively removed from the financial system, which puts them out of all sorts of opportunities. So in future video, I'm going to continue with a little bit more detail on aspects of personal finance, with the intent of informing people how crucial the situation is, that they be conscious of this and that they be responsible, and understand that there are different terms of our outlook, that sure, we want something now, and it seems like we can afford something now, or afford it in the short-term future, but there's uncertainty at all these different time frames, and in the long term, if we get behind in the financial system, there are serious consequences. And so to the extent possible, we should really try to avoid that.